I think we've become soft. We've become really soft. And, look, I don't really see it go in the direction of gas chambers. But what I'm...
You see it going in the direction of digital gas chambers. I get it. And I understand.
No, worse than that, actually.
Digital prisons, whatever you want to call it. Right.
No, even worse than that. What I see coming is extinction. Right? Extinction. And my feeling is it is our obligation to head that off. And the tools with which to head it off are not at our disposal.
So when you say extinction, what's the path that takes us to extinction?
Well, there are a lot of them that could, but my basic point would be what we have is the generating function. We have tools that are scaling up our disasters. Our disasters are getting worse and worse, and we haven't had an existential one yet. But we have several things on the map that could be that large, and they're being managed by fools. People who really don't understand what they're doing, don't understand the first thing about complex systems, right? The hubris of these people who are managing these systems is so great that the systems will take us out when they mismanage them. And so somehow, and I know I'm going to take a lot of crap for using this phrase because it's like invoking Nazis, right? As soon as you do, you've lost the argument. It is a rush the cockpit moment. That's where we are. And I don't know how to convince you of that because frankly, this is pretty comfortable. I had a lovely breakfast this morning. It all feels pretty okay. You're right. Comedy's coming back. We're getting our tools back. They're having a harder time throwing us off social media. All that's to the good. It's not nearly sufficient to protect us from what's coming.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, let me give you an example. There is a problem where the sun periodically throws off these bursts of energy, right? Now, the sun is a sphere. These things are thrown off effectively in random directions. Gigantic storms get thrown off fairly regularly, and mostly they don't come anywhere near us. And every so often one does come near us, and sometimes they hit us, right? We are running an incredibly large risk that one of these is going to take out a major section of the power grid across an entire continent. It is not implausible that we would lose a third of the North American power grid. And when it goes down, it's not like it comes back on a few days later. The transformers that hold this system together, that run it, it would take more than a year. If you ordered one today, it would take more than a year for it to be delivered. And that's in a system that is not pressured by the need to replace many of them simultaneously, right? Now, if you imagine a third of North America going dark, already you've got a question. Are the Canadian and American governments sufficiently competent at this moment to keep order under such a circumstance? Well, I sure don't know that they are. Second thing, we have numerous nuclear reactors in these zones. Every single one of them requires a constant input of electrical energy, or the water that is used to keep all the spent fuel that has gone through these reactors from catching fire will boil away, right? So they all have, I think it's 2 weeks supply of diesel fuel on site in order to keep them cool. Probably, I think I know that most of them have at least a month, which is more than they are legally required to have, which is great. But we're talking about doing this over the course of a year. Any one of these in which the vigilance to keep the diesel fuel flowing to those reactors, any place where that fails, turns that reactor into a nuclear volcano.
Well, no, you can shut them down.
Right? You can't shut them down.
What do you mean?
You can't shut them down. And this is one of these things where I didn't know this until Fukushima happened, at which point I learned a lot about fission power. The fact is, when you run this material through the reactor, it's actually fairly safe before it's gone through the reactor. It becomes much more dangerous in the reactor, right? And then there's a period of something like 5 years where the only way to keep it from catching fire is to keep it underwater and to keep the water circulating. It needs constant influx of cold water in order to keep it cool, right? Now, the reason that stuff is still in these reactors or on these reactor sites is that we never made good on our promise to find something to do with it, right? When these reactors were first built, we were told, look, we'll figure out where to put it. Well, it'll be in Yucca Mountain. We'll find something really stable, a good place it'll go. That never happened. So the stuff is all stored on site, which is really the worst place it could be, because if the reactor goes bad, it gets in the way of your ability to manage the spent fuel that came through it. So for 5 years after coming out of these reactors, the stuff has to be actively cooled. It contains literally the worst stuff on Earth, right? Including plutonium with a 200,000 year half-life, right? Really dangerous stuff. And it will all be liberated into the atmosphere if it catches fire. And it will make it impossible to manage the rest of the stuff that's there, right? All the stuff that's been there longer than 5 years could be taken out of these reactors, and it could be put in what's called dry cask storage. Dry cask storage isn't great, still highly radioactive. Stuff in there has a really long half-life, but it at least doesn't require vigilance, right? It just sits there inert, and as long as nobody breaks open the container, it's okay. But we're not doing that. Why not? Because it costs money. So what I'm telling you is that accidentally, we built a doomsday device, and we distributed it across North America, across Europe, right? It's just sitting there, right? And it's sitting there waiting for a failure that could be flung out of the sun at any minute. And at the point it gets flung out of the sun, we can calculate roughly the likelihood that the storm will hit us. We can calculate based on how big the storm is, what the potential is for it to do damage to our grids. But there's nothing we can do about it. So here's the weird punchline in that story. The remedy for this isn't expensive, right? We're talking something to solve this problem in North America. We're talking about a sum of money that has been estimated as something like equivalent to a B-2 bomber, right? Stealth bomber. That's not a lot of money. You could tax the rich, you could tax the middle class, and you could come up with that kind of money and nobody would notice it. It's tiny, right? And yet we don't do it because the people who are managing our system are insane. They've left this vulnerability there for no reason. It doesn't serve anybody's interests. It's just easy to ignore it because it's kind of abstract and technical and nobody notices it because it's not a political winner, right? So in that world, right, that's one that we can say, hey, we know enough about this one to describe it. But then there's a whole series of other things where something has been done that we only discover after the disaster, that some process was underway that we needed to know about ahead of time, right? Gain of function research. How much did you know about that before COVID? I wasn't paying attention.
No.
Right. So, okay, they're doing gain of function research. Well, how much more of that are they doing and on what? And, how good is their security and how much of it's in Ukraine and what happens if there's a war, right? You got that. You've got the Aliso Canyon disaster in which we're pumping natural gas into old oil deposits and storing it there and it can spring a leak. We've got the Deepwater Horizon accident. We've got the financial collapse of 2008, right? With the credit default swaps. I mean, the point is people are inventing dangerous technologies all around us. And you know what? We've gotten through all of them so far. But at some point, something that is of the appropriate scale to take us out is going to get unleashed. And my point is, I want to know the name of every technology that has that capacity now. And then I want really smart people who aren't corrupt to discuss how you properly manage it. And I know that none of that's happening.
Mm. Well, congratulations. I'm slightly less optimistic than I was before we started this conversation. Well done, Bret.
Sorry.
Well, we're having a conversation completely outside of my area of expertise. So I don't really have that much to come back to you with. Well,
look, it's outside of all of our areas of expertise. I'm not a nuclear engineer, right? I don't even know what I would need to be, a astrophysicist to know about solar storms at the proper level. I do know enough to evaluate this gain of function stuff, but really none of that is the point, right? You do know enough to say, well, hey, that credit default swap thing sounds like it was a bad idea before it went bad. And then we found out about it at the point it had gone bad, and it didn't take out the world economy, but it was of a scale that tells us that's possible, right? So something out there, we've got a sorcerer's apprentice problem, right? There's something out there with the power to unleash things that it cannot keep under control. And we don't have the wisdom to address it. And so anyway, I do feel...
See, it's interesting you make that point because credit default swaps is something I understand a little bit. And actually, what's interesting about the 2008 financial crisis is it is the direct consequence of the Clinton administration abandoning rules that were set in place after the Great Depression Glass-Steagall to prevent that from happening again. So it's not so much that we don't have the competence, it's more that we are greedy enough that we think, well, look, if we take the brakes off the car, we can go faster.
Right.
And that's how so I understand your concern, but also I suppose I'm kind of philosophical about extinction. I fear death only as a personal thing. I fear dying if it means that my wife and child and people I love are going to be without me and they need me. I actually am not that concerned about dying if we all die together.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that in myself too. I don't know what it's about. It's a little odd.
Yeah.
It's a little odd, but
I don't fear death. I fear leaving people behind who might like me or love me or need me.
Yes.
But I've lived a great life already.
I have exactly the same sense.
I'm very comfortable with who if I died 10 years ago, I'd be concerned that I hadn't become the human being that I could die and know that I'm proud of that person. Today, I'm more comfortable in that. I'm like, this is a person who's stuck by his principles, who's done some things that he thought were important, who's created something, who's employed people, who's made other people's lives better, who's helped his friends, who's, all of that. And so I hear you, the accelerating pace of technological change means that we're left in the hands of people that we wouldn't otherwise choose to trust. And the catastrophe that could come from that failure is extinction level. Sure.
Okay.
I'm okay with it, Bret.
Well, all right. Well, I hate to be this guy because I want to make you less okay with it.
Some of us are going to survive, is the way you're going to say.
No. First of all, I'm not entirely convinced that that's right, but it could be. Yeah. But I guess the point is, I detest the idea that some will survive and we will leave them a greatly diminished planet that will not recover. Right? They might live on it. Maybe it will be possible to continue on and the human species will do whatever's next, but it will be on a planet that we wrecked. And I can't be okay with that. Now, look.
There's a practical issue to all of this, Bret, which is everything you're saying may be completely true. And I'm sure there are big elements of it that are. But at the end of the day, I've always made my life about solving the problems that I think I have a role in and that I can solve. And this ain't one of them.
Well, no, I disagree with you completely. I'll try it with 2 points.
Okay.
One, I agree with where you are, right? I've had a great life. I feel like, as you, I'm in the black. I have contributed more than I have absorbed, right? And so I'm not looking to die. I will avoid it as long as possible. I really don't want to strand my family. But, if I went to the doctor tomorrow and I got a terminal diagnosis, I would think, well, it sucks that it wasn't longer, but I can't complain, right? On the other hand, we are temporary custodians of something that has been in motion for 3.5 billion years. I don't really care about it very much. I think the planet is full of cool creatures, and the creatures that we were before we were human are cool, and I like all that. But the ability to be a human being, right? The ability to have the capacity to even catch a glimpse of where we are and how unlikely that is and what it implies about the universe, and to have some idea of how big the universe is and to look at really marvelous things and be provoked and to feel love and all of these great things, right? That experience is, it is the greatest experience that could be, as far as I know. And I believe that we have an obligation to deliver it to as many people as can possibly experience it. Now, asterisk, I know that in the end, none of us get out of here alive. Our species will go extinct, right? The sun is going to swallow the Earth. I believe before that, our galaxy will collide with Andromeda, which ain't going to be pretty, right? Even if we were to escape these galaxies, ultimately, the universe either goes cold or, hot or whatever the end might be. But the point is, in the end, philosophically speaking, even whatever we might accomplish as a species and whatever we might escape, it'll get us in the end. That said, that right there could be an argument for not taking my next breath, but I'm not listening, right? I'm taking my next breath. I'm going to enjoy the hell out of this. I'm going to do as much good as I can. And I'm going to do everything in my power to deliver this opportunity to people in the future, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? That's what we are. And we don't quite get it because evolution built us to perceive and to contemplate only those things in which there would be value in us perceiving and contemplating, which for our ancestors wasn't very far in the future. They didn't have any power over the future. we have ultimate power over the future. So we have to correct our thinking, and we have to start seeing our distant descendants as important, which isn't easy because they are completely anonymous and mysterious to us. But I still feel I have an obligation to them. And if we blink out tomorrow, I'm not going to feel shortchanged, but I'm going to feel a deep sense of shame that we failed them.